Good morning. My name is Annette Thacker-Bartlett, and I'm with the OSSI Division of Elementary, Secondary, and Specialized Education. I'm joined today by my colleague, Ms. Kathy Ash, from the Division of Data Assessment and Research. And today we have special guests. Our presentation today will largely be presented by our non-public monitoring team, in particular Dr. Edgar Stewart, who is the manager of that team, and Sharon Powell, who is a specialist on that team. The topic today is going to focus on how, on a memorandum of agreement tool that can be used between LEAs and non-publics as they work together to serve students. But before we dig into, so the agenda for today is we're going to do a quick intro, and then we're going to do a quick overview of the relationship between LEAs and non-publics, and then dig into the elements of a memorandum of agreement, or MOA, and how to effectively implement it. Then we'll examine a case study, and then we will look at the sample MOA tool, or template, and then we will wrap up with announcements and reminders. But before we get started, I want to get a sense of our audience here today. So I would like to know, what is your current role relating to the LEA SE POC? So if you could take a minute and quickly take this poll. Are you the main point of contact that is experienced? Are you new to this role this year? Are you not the main POC, but you're just, you support the main POC? Maybe you're the POC for a particular campus if you have a large LEA. Or maybe you just help out the POC and they want you to listen in today. All right, thank you everyone for taking that poll. Let's see, we have, it's split, you know, about half and half for the main POC that are experienced versus not experienced. And then a few of you assist the POCs. That's great. Okay, and now, the next poll question that I would like to ask you, as in particular for our topic today, if you could make your best guess, if you don't know exactly the answer, how many students enrolled in your LEA are currently attending a non-public program? A few more seconds to answer the question. Great, thank you for voting. As you can see, we have a lot of you that do not yet have a student placed at a non-public, but that is great you're listening today because you could have a student even this year that gets placed at a non-public, so it's great to prepare for that. And the final question that I would like to poll you on today before we get started is, how many non-publics do you work with? So this is for those of you that do have non-public students enrolled at your LEA that attend non-publics. Sometimes those students are scattered across many different programs, or sometimes all of them are attending one particular program. So we'd like to get a sense of the quantity of different non-public programs that you interact with on a regular basis. Thank you for your votes. So you can see here, it's spread out. There's a few of you that work with a lot of separate non-public programs, and some of you work with a handful, and some of you, again, are not yet in this position to have students at non-publics, but you very well could in the future. So thank you for taking the time. I am now going to turn the time over to Dr. Stewart to begin the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Annette. Good morning. I'm here with my colleague Sharon Powell, and we'll be presenting to you this morning. First, we wanted to just go over some group norms to really kind of just help frame the conversation that we'll have this morning. We'd like folks to remember that, we're all here for the same purpose, really trying to kind of serve our students with disabilities who are in non-public schools in the most effective way. So as we talk about the challenges, the barriers to effective collaboration between non-publics and LEAs, we remind you to be open to new ideas and different perspectives. Also, be positive and consider what we can achieve together here. As you're providing feedback, think about it and frame it in constructive ways, also being respectful of others, and allow us time to be able to, and others to be able to contribute to the discussion we'll have today, and also to be reflective. Our objectives for this session will be for participants to be able to learn how to use an MOA to effectively collaborate between non-publics and LEAs and clarify the roles, expectations, and timelines that are important. We'll also review examples of barriers to effective collaboration, along with being able to, really from a focused problem-solving perspective, be able to generate ideas and identify potential solution to those barriers through the use of an MOA. And then finally, participants will be able to receive tips on drafting an effective MOA. The impetus for this discussion today is twofold. The members of my team review student files and will also conduct on-site visits with non-public schools. And as a result of that, we identify non-compliance in various ways. And what has occurred to us in our observations over the past couple of years is that the source of a significant amount of that non-compliance results from the respective parties, the non-public school and the LEA, not really being clear about their roles, not really effectively leveraging the collaboration that could essentially serve students better and really serve to ensure compliance. So what we wanted to do was to try and identify some vehicles through which the non-public school and the LEA can think about those in a more kind of organized way, and the result would be more effectively serving students with disabilities who are attending non-public schools. So let's look at the client-provider relationship between the non-public school, who is the provider, and the LEA, who is the client. From the provider side, the non-public is committed to serving students from the local LEA, and their families. They serve those students under the federal requirements under IDEA and also the Certificate of Approval or local regulations. If those standards are not met, one of the outgrowths of that could be that the non-public provider receives fewer referrals in the future and potentially runs the risk of losing their certificate of approval. So as the provider, that role is extremely important for non-public schools to remember in working both with the student and the LEA that the student comes from. On the other side, the LEA really can be seen as the client. The expectation from the LEA's perspective is that the non-public school provides a level of specialization and service that the LEA is not able to provide for that student within the LEA environment. And as such, the expectation from the LEA is that the non-public is well aware of the regulations, both the federal and COA regulations that govern the practice and the documentation processes for serving students with disabilities, and that they are implementing with a high degree of fidelity, best practices in serving that student per their IEP. Now, when the LEA is not satisfied with the services or the collaborative relationship with the non-public school, the LEA really should be first raising those concerns directly with the non-public school. We often find, when we identify non-compliance or in our outreach to non-publics and LEAs, when they raise concerns to us, our first question is, what has the nature of this conversation been up to this point? And what we often find is that, there are very few conversations going on, either informally or formal written communication by email, that precedes, OSSI being brought into it. And what we really want to emphasize is, as the client for receiving those services, that the LEA is in the position to drive that ship initially and provide that first outreach and communicate directly with the non-public. If concerns are not addressed, the LEAs, like the non-public, can also raise those concerns to OSSI. So in thinking about some of the roles, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list, this diagram kind of helps us to think about, both on the LEA side and on the non-public school side, some of the roles and responsibilities that we see in serving students with disabilities. For the LEA, one of their primary activities should be engaging in ongoing student progress monitoring. Really, that looks at academic progress, both with report cards, quarterly progress reports, grading and assignments, and progress towards students' IEP goals. In addition, the LEA should be attending to any identified non-compliance at the student level and correcting it as soon as possible. While the student is attending the non-public school, anytime there is concerns about the student's unexcused absences or truancy, the LEA is really in the position to be driving the ship towards any kind of attendance intervention planning. And then finally, the LEA is responsible for conducting triennial evaluations. And what that means is that ultimately the LEA is responsible for any evaluations that need to be conducted, but certainly can be in the position to work with the non-public school on identifying who will actually complete the evaluations within the appropriate time periods. Let's do a quick sound check to make sure that folks are able to hear us effectively. If you could type into your chat box and let us know if you're able to hear us. Yep, good, we're good? Okay. So in looking at the roles and responsibilities of the non-public school, reporting responsibilities for any incidents involving emergency behavioral interventions, conducting IEP follow-up meetings for students who have been involved in those incidents involving emergency behavioral interventions. Also, attendance reporting for students who accrue both excused and unexcused absences. The non-public school may also be responsible for scheduling and convening IEP meetings in conjunction with the LEA. Quarterly progress reporting, and also ensuring that related services are delivered to the student and that the appropriate documentation is uploaded to the student's file to attest to that. So here's another breakdown of looking at the broader set of roles and responsibilities across OSSI, the LEA, and the non-public school. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to give you, an idea about it. For the LEA is really responsible for ensuring that all student data that occurs and that is uploaded to the student's special education file in SEDS is accurate, timely, and complete. The non-public school is responsible for ensuring that any of their portions of that student data in SEDS is also accurate, timely, and complete. And during our file reviews, we look for that kind of information, and it's the basis of a significant portion of our student-level compliance monitoring that we conduct at least once every year. So we see that across a number of these different areas that there are respective roles that the non-public, the OSSI, and also the non-public school play. And in correcting identified non-compliance, we see that the LEA is driving that ship as it relates to student-level findings. And as such, the non-public should be working with the LEA to assist them in correcting any of that identified non-compliance. And then we see that OSSI verifies all correction of non-compliance in a timely way. So here are some more areas to look at in terms of the clarification of roles and responsibilities. And I'm just going to skip down to the last one. For looking at LRE, or the least restrictive environment, the LEA and their ongoing progress monitoring should always be, considering whether the non-public school setting is the least restrictive environment for a student as they're making progress or as they're having challenges with progress. The non-public school should be also engaging in that conversation with the LEA at least annually, but also when students have made enough progress that they're able to return to the LEA, the non-public school would work to facilitate that transition. And OSSI, of course, in our monitoring role as the state education authority, oversees and evaluates the process by which the LEA and the non-public are looking at LRE. So let's go on to the elements that one might include in a memorandum of agreement. What we're going to be covering in this section are some of the suggested areas that we've identified based on our experience and practice in the field, but also through the context of our monitoring compliance activities, both with the LEA and student file reviews, and also with the non-public school and our on-site visits. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but really it's designed to kind of help all stakeholders really think about what might the important elements be that they would include in respective MOAs that they develop. The final list will really be determined by each dyad of a non-public school and an LEA to suit their individual needs. So some important areas to consider in terms of data systems. There are a number of data systems that both LEAs and non-publics access to ensure various activities, including attendance, correction of non-compliance, scheduling, convening IEP meetings, documenting IEP processes occur. So in terms of considering those data systems, ensuring that there are identified points of contact, each LEA should have an LEA SE SEDS POC, and each non-public school should have a non-public SEDS POC. Also, in terms of thinking about access for the staff at the non-public school and the LEA, again, really making sure that as new staff members come on board at the non-public school, that they have the appropriate access, that users are trained, both in terms of the functionality of the respective systems, whether it's SEDS, whether it's SEATS, which is the Special Education Attendance Tracking System, TOTE for arranging transportation, that the appropriate users have the training and understand both from a functionality perspective, but also from a timelines and process perspective what's expected. So again, making that explicit in terms of who is responsible for each of these areas under the data systems really helps to ensure that things don't fall through the cracks. Oftentimes what we see when we go out on our on-site visits and also when we conduct student file reviews is that there's missing documentation in the file, and there are users who don't have the appropriate access to provide that and are also in many cases unaware of what the compliance expectations are around documentation. Another area to consider in terms of an element for an MOA is IEP coordination. So who's going to be convening meetings, tracking annual IEP deadlines, drafting IEP documents, uploading them to the student SEDS file, really identifying very explicitly who the responsible staff members are and in what time frame each of the activities will be conducted. Again, helps to really hammer out and make this an explicit process that there's kind of a shared understanding about. IEP development and implementation. So one of the most persistent areas of noncompliance that we see and we've seen over the past several years is related services delivery. Oftentimes we know that related services are being delivered to non-public students, but finding the documentation that demonstrates that all of the appropriate related services that have been identified for a student per their IEP that documentation can be elusive. Either it's not in the system in ways that we're able to easily tally or identify in a cursory file scanning, or through the related services management report, we don't see that the related services wizard has been used to document the delivery of services. Again, kind of going back to the perspective on the client and the provider, while we know and it's easy to identify that the non-public school is the provider, as the client, the LEA is in the position to be tracking this information, knowing that their students receive X number of services per week, so that by the end of the month there should be 4 or 5 service trackers that would reflect the delivery of services. The LEA can be in the position to query the non-public school about where that documentation is on an ongoing basis to ensure students are getting what they need. And that really leads us into the next area in terms of IEP documentation. All of these areas here are common areas that we see in our student file reviews where there is not the documentation in the student's file to demonstrate that the appropriate services have been delivered, or the progress reports illustrating the student's progress within the previous grading period have been uploaded to SEDS. Any questions so far? Pause. Good. Emergency behavioral interventions. Here in this area, which is a pretty significant area for students who end up in being involved in incidents that involve a restraint or seclusion, there's a whole set of regulatory requirements about how those emergency interventions are implemented, by which staff members, and requirements around the elements required to be in an incident report, along with who needs to be notified, the parent, the LEA, and other agencies. And then finally, the IEP meeting follow-up, which requires that for students who have been restrained and who do not have emergency behavioral interventions authorized in their IEP, and who also don't have a BIP, there's a requirement that an IEP meeting be convened within 10 days to follow up to consider the use of an FBA or a BIP. And we see here as another persistently high area of noncompliance, and it's apparent to us that LEAs and non-public schools could really strengthen their practice around the shared understanding of what's required documentation-wise and in what time periods, and really articulating who the appropriate staff members are who should be following up on these activities. So now we move into the area of evaluation and reevaluation. As I said before, the LEA is ultimately responsible for ensuring that students are evaluated at the triennial point for their evaluation. Now, where those evaluations take place, whether a member of the LEA or evaluators from the LEA go to the non-public school, or the non-public school conducts those evaluations themselves, those decisions are made in a conversation between the LEA and the non-public school. And what's really important here is understanding that there are timelines for the conducting of the evaluations that need to be adhered to, and both the LEA and non-public are in the position to be able to monitor those dates and also ensure that the appropriate evaluations take place. But again, what we see is that things fall through the cracks when there's not clear guidelines around the roles and responsibilities with regard to who conducts evaluations or reevaluations. So we're just going to continue going through the MOA important areas. As if you have questions about any one of these areas, please feel free to put your questions into the chat box, and we'll certainly pause to answer questions to make sure that we're clarifying points that need to be clarified or expounding on them in ways that others might find useful. Another area to consider including in an MOA is the consideration of the student's least restrictive environment annually. So what does that look like in terms of the respective roles of both the LEA and the non-public school, and in what time frame will those activities take place? Students who are in tested grades are assessed each year with a statewide assessment, either the PARC or alternate assessments. There are a whole host of preparation and training activities that occur for any entity that will be involved in statewide testing. And that includes both the LEA and the non-public school, and it's incumbent upon the LEA to ensure that any non-public school that is serving students at the time of the PARC testing have undergone all of the preparation and training activities to ensure that they're prepared for conducting that statewide testing. So again, this is an area that we see that things fall through the cracks where non-public schools are not aware of all of the preparatory activities and trainings that go on, so they're not adequately prepared by the time the statewide assessment is concerned. Okay. So again, this is an area that really warrants consideration of strengthening the expectations around statewide testing preparation, training, and administration. We're going to take a pause here, and a number of questions have come in, and we'll come back to those in a minute. Okay, our first question here, we'll go back to the emergency behavioral interventions. Where in the IEP should emergency behavioral interventions be documented? The emergency behavioral interventions, so those incidents involving restraint or seclusion, should be documented in an incident report. And the required elements of the incident report are in the Certificate of Approval regulations. We're happy to provide, we have an emergency behavioral intervention tip sheet that includes all the relevant regulations, provides much more detail about the staffing, the determining what constitutes an imminent danger for the student or others. That would be the basis of those emergency behavioral interventions, and also provides more detail around the documentation, notification, and follow-up aspects. So we're happy to pass that information along after this webinar. The next question that we see here, can you expound on the emergency behavior intervention list? A meeting must occur for any student who has been restrained and does not have a current BIP. Yes, that's correct. So, as I said, the emergency behavior intervention tip sheet, along with positive behavior supports, we're happy to provide that resource that really provides that in a lot more detail. But essentially, for any student who does not have authorized on their IEP, the use of emergency behavioral interventions in specific circumstances for very specific behaviors, and who also does not have a current BIP, there is an IEP meeting that is required to be convened within 10 days of the incident, each of the incidents, to consider the use of an FBA or to either modify an existing BIP or implement a BIP if one has not been implemented. There is a question about a student-specific question regarding the last few slides. We will be happy to there's contact information at the end of this slide deck, and we're happy to have a conversation, so please feel free to just reach out to us. Finally, we will email the handouts that we referred to, including the emergency behavioral intervention tip sheet, following this presentation. Okay, so let's move on. I think that's the questions that we had so far. Secondary transition. This is an area that many of you know that the district is under special conditions to ensure high levels of compliance for secondary transition planning, assessment, service delivery compliance. So this is an area where we're seeing that at the non-public school, with regard to those students, that there are significant areas of non-compliance. So again, including these areas in an MOA to ensure who's responsible for what and what time frame is extremely important. Okay, so finally, ensuring that the non-public SEDS POC and the LEA SEDS POC collaborate to identify access issues, troubleshoot issues with documentation or permissions, and assigning students to non-public related service provider caseloads is an area, again, where we see significant non-compliance resulting from what seems to be a lack of that ongoing collaboration. And then finally, another area to consider is, as new staff members come on board, both at the LEA and at the non-public school throughout the year, ensuring that they're appropriately oriented, receive the appropriate access to the data systems, and also the training on using those data systems is an important area to consider in an MOA. We've seen instances where non-public schools have lost staff members who have been the non-public SEDS POC, and the non-public school isn't clear then, once that person leaves, who then is responsible for troubleshooting any SEDS access issues, assigning caseloads, and can lead to significant non-compliance in an ongoing way. So let's move on, unless there are any questions, to talk about effectively implementing the MOA. Communication, as you might understand. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to, sorry about that, had a little bit of a distraction here, to Sharon Powell, who will be talking with you about the effectively implementing the MOA.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Powell. I'm an education program specialist with the non-public monitoring team and serve as the non-public monitoring supervisor. So before we get to our case study and our sample MOA, I'd like to take a minute to review the importance of establishing communication routines, so setting up some rules for engaging with non-public schools and programs. So while creating this MOA is a key step in establishing, basically outlining who is going to be responsible for what and when those activities take place, it's important that both parties determine who are the key points of contact and agreeing on the best form of communication. So you might ultimately decide that the LEA point of contact and the non-public contact would like to meet on a monthly basis by phone. So that's one arrangement that you could set up in advance. And that meeting can be used to provide status updates and to troubleshoot any areas that are identified as needing attention. And it's also important to plan for challenges. So even with this MOA, communication breakdowns can occur. So before getting to that point, we strongly recommend that you agree on how you will attempt to resolve those issues. So as a starting point, it would make sense to refer to the MOA to see whether those guidelines have been outlined, and if not, to plan to have a discussion and identify which party will take part in that and who is going to be taking the meeting notes and circulating them. Also, after you have attempted and then not succeeded in addressing a particular issue, that would be the time to escalate to OSCE. Of course, OSCE will be looking to see whether you have demonstrated your due diligence, so made 3 attempts in multiple modalities, to resolve the issue without escalating to OSCE. But then after that point, of course, we want to hear from you. Okay, so that moving along to the case study. Here we have a case study, and I'll just read it out loud. We have a 16-year-old student with a disability who recently transferred LEAs. The student is enrolled in a DC LEA called Happy Public Charter School and attending a non-public school named Anytown Crest Non-Public School in Maryland. The student's current IEP will expire on March 3rd, 2017, so in approximately 3.5 months. As the student's triennial eligibility determination is also coming due on that same day, his previous LEA had arranged to have the staff test the student at the non-public in January. While the student has been attending Anytown Crest, he has been truant on several days, and while at school has been involved in several altercations that necessitated the school to use physical restraints. The student has reportedly been receiving behavior support services as well as speech therapy, although the LEA learned that the non-public has not had any therapist or counselor on staff since August, and this speech therapist is new to DC and has not yet been granted access to SEDS. OSCE is scheduled to conduct student file reviews at the beginning of September to determine the LEA's compliance with federal and local special education regulatory requirements. A preliminary scan of the LEA's of the student's file in SEDS revealed that several draft progress notes exist, the incident report forms are missing, and there are no service trackers. So in order to have a look at this case study, we want to use the following 4 questions to guide our analysis. Based on the facts from the previous slides, what are the immediate compliance concerns? Based on the facts from the previous slide, what are the most important compliance concerns for each party, for both of the parties to review?
Sorry, we've got a pause here. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Okay, there we go.
Okay. So we have these 4 questions to guide our analysis. Continuing, I think, where we dropped off, based on the facts from the previous slides, what are the immediate compliance concerns? What are the most important compliance concerns to review for each party and both parties to review? And which party, in number 3, has a role in remedying these issues and ensuring that they don't reoccur in the future? And then finally, number 4, based on your review, would you be inclined to address any additional areas in this MOA between the parties? Okay. Okay. So here we are identifying identifying the immediate concerns. So one thing as the new LEA that we want to pay attention to is that the current IEP is going to expire and that the student's triennial evaluation also is becoming due, so that the LEA and the non-public need to determine who is going to lead the convening of that meeting, who is going to be responsible, for example, for sending out the LOI to the student, to the parent or the adult student, and because the student is over 16, if the student does not already have a secondary transition plan in place, one will need to be created. We also are concerned that the student has a series of unexcused absences. So in the DCMR, non-public schools are required to notify the LEA within, I believe it's 24 hours or one business day, I'm not sure on the time frame right now, that a student has missed. If the student has accrued 5 or 10 days of unexcused absences, it's at those critical points where the non-public is responsible for flagging that for the LEA. Even though the LEA is receiving, is able to view attendance records in seats, since the student is attending the non-public, since they're showing up in person at the non-public or not, it is a requirement for the non-public to flag that for the LEA. So we want to see that the non-public has sent that notification, and then the LEA responds to that notification appropriately by, for example, setting up a school-based student support team so that they can initiate an attendance intervention plan and review the student's attendance record, try to identify any underlying causes, and all of those, all the different steps that are involved in an attendance and truancy intervention. We're also concerned to learn that the student has been, that the school has used emergency behavioral interventions on the student. So we want to ensure that the LEA and the parent are notified, and not only that they're notified, but our regulations require that an actual copy of the incident report is sent to the parent and the LEA. Sometimes the LEA, the LEAs can't know what they don't know. So in a memorandum of understanding, it might be useful to have the non-public report out to you how many times has this student been restrained in a month. And if that number is 0, then you would know that the student has definitely not been restrained. It's just that you have not been notified of that fact. Okay. We also are concerned that the student is prescribed behavioral support services and speech therapy on their IEP, but that we know that the therapist, that this non-public school has not had a therapist on staff since August, and that the speech therapist does not have access to SED. So from our perspective, if we run an RSMR, it looks like the student has not received any services. We're also concerned when we see draft progress reports in SED, since those only have a 30-day life in SED. So as part of the MOA, the non-public and the LEA can create a process by which that report would be reviewed and finalized. So setting up time frames and the individuals responsible for doing that. And again, the incident reports, and again, the service trackers. So we kind of just went over these. So what are our concerns, which overlap to a great extent to what are our most important compliance concerns. And then discussing, having the LEA and the non-public, as they're drafting this MOA, decide who is responsible for what and who will lead which process. And based on your review, would you be inclined to address any additional areas in this MOA between the parties? So for example, you might want to identify the staff who are responsible for the specific activities, including task-specific timelines. OSSI, as part of our monitoring responsibilities, we're required to visit non-public schools once within the life cycle of their COA. So currently that's once every 3 years. Before OSSI visits a school, it might be helpful for the LEA and the non-public to walk through our monitoring tool to see how the school is performing when it comes to reviewing the student's file and whether they're compliant in the areas that we're reviewing on that particular visit. It might also be helpful if the non-public school does not already have this practice in place to introduce a 30-day review period for students who have recently transferred into the program. Oops. And if the student who is transferring into your LEA in mid-year and their IEP renewed at the beginning of the year, it might be useful to schedule a meeting in the spring to make that final ESY determination if that wasn't made previously. Okay, so moving on to the sample MOA. This is...
You can remind them that they have that handout, so it's not very...
Okay, so if you have any difficulty reading this on the PowerPoint slide, you will have access to a copy, a Word document copy through the webinar.
So if you look down at on your interface where it says handouts, one of the handouts is the actual this slide and the full MOA template.
And just to repeat, this is a sample MOA. So this MOA was created between CFSA and LEA. It's a template for a memorandum of agreement between CFSA and an LEA. And in this case, it was drafted to provide some guidance for the provision of education to students who are in foster care. So we wanted to share this document with you so that you can use it as a template, as a guideline. These are the main areas that are seen in many MOAs. So starting off with the introduction and the authority of the MOA, moving to the overview of programs and goals, and down to the applicability. Who does the MOA apply to? So in this case, this MOA applies to children who are in the care and custody of CFSA and placed in foster care. So this could be modified to apply to children who are placed in non-public schools and are and the LEA needs to ensure that they are receiving free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. So it would be mostly in this third section. Let's see. So in the fifth section under programmatic obligations and responsibilities, pursuant to the applicable authority and in the furtherance of the shared goals of the parties to carry out the purpose of the MOA expeditiously, the parties hereby agree as follows. And then under coordination and points of contact, under coordination you could outline the communication routines that you will be following, and in the B, the points of contacts, who are the individuals who will be primarily responsible for ensuring that certain activities are carried out. And let's see, and just going back for a moment to the very beginning under introduction, so the LEA and the and in this case, so it would be the LEA and then a non-public school, collectively referred to here as the parties, and to enter into this memorandum of agreement for the purpose of establishing a collaborative partnership to ensure the implementation of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as amended to the Every Student Succeeds Act provisions regarding, and again, the provision of FAPE to students who are placed in non-public schools. So in that way, the agreement can be modified. Okay, so we'll take a break. If you have any questions, please enter them into your question fields.
All right. Thanks for those submitting those questions. Our non-public monitoring team is going to continue to look at those questions in the chat box, and we'll stay on the line for a few minutes after the webinar. Also, if your questions are not answered live today, they will follow up with you. So keep those questions coming. Thank you for your engagement today. Now we're going to finish up the webinar, and we just have 1 minute left. So we want to do a few announcements and reminders. Just very quickly. A reminder, non-public staff should not come to you to get a SEDS account. Sometimes they'll come to you and say, hey, we need a SEDS account, can you create one for me? No, don't do it. Redirect them to OSSI. OSSI creates the SEDS account, and we always make an aggregate account. Even if your LEA is the only LEA that they need access to, still don't do it. Let OSSI do it. OSSI will make an aggregate account. It will have your LEA there, and that might be all, but in the future you might have another that particular staff member at the non-public might have other LEAs that send them students. So if they ask you, please redirect them to OSSI, to the OSSI support tool. Then after OSSI gives them an account, then they should come to you and say, okay, I have an account, please grant me access to your students that come to my school. And that's when you step in, look up their user profile, and check the right box for their campus to allow them to see your students at their campus. A quick reminder about the OSSI support tool when you are submitting tickets. Recently, we've had a number of users where they have an issue that affects multiple students, and they put in multiple tickets for the exact same issue for all of these students. So if it truly is the same issue affecting multiple students, just do one ticket and then use the global issues template, and in that template you can type in all the names of the students that it affects. And so that's more efficient for you and more efficient for OSSI in solving the problem. So here's where you can find that global issue template. Another reminder, when you are doing a ticket, please do not use the other category unless your issue truly does not fit any of the issues or subcategory issues. This slows down the process because when tickets come in, we have staff that are gatekeepers, and they will route the question. If they see what category it is, they can quickly route that question to the appropriate team so that they can start to work on it right away. If you choose other, it takes more time for that person to figure out where to send the question, especially if it's very specialized. So please try to avoid using it unless it really is an other. Now sometimes you don't see your issue in the issue type, but it actually pops up in the subcategory. So for example, enrollment. When I click on enrollment, here's a picture of all the subcategories. For example, student not appearing in SEDS, even though the student is at my LEA. Or student appearing in SEDS, even though they're not attending the LEA. So you can see here, this might be your exact problem, but this is the subcategory, not the main category, so you don't see it at first. So please drill down and look at all the subcategories. Try to find one that fits. And here's a few examples of what should not be an other. So if the student disappeared from our SEDS. I saw his name in the system. Can you please assist getting her back in SEDS? Great. Go to the enrollment category and choose the subcategory that's appropriate. Or if this student is no longer attending our school, they moved to West Virginia. Again, this is an enrollment issue, and then choose the correct subcategory. And then sometimes it's a system issue. System issue is kind of a vague category, so click on system issue and then check out the subcategories. I don't think
Are you saying it?
All right, a reminder about child outcome summary. The deadline is coming up. This is for those of you that have preschool and pre-K students with IEPs. If you have not yet verified that they have entry data in DC CATS that is submitted, please work on that. So go to your DC CATS, log in, check the list, make sure every single student who is preschool or pre-K with an IEP has entry data. Now you might have submitted it last year. If they're in pre-kindergarten, you might have already submitted it last school year. You do not need to do entry data again. It's a one-time thing. Now you may not be the preschool special education point of contact. So if you're not, you need to get in touch with that person and say, hey, how are you doing with child outcome summary? Are you going to meet that deadline? And here is an email address that you or they can use to send any questions or request support, phone call, webinar. If you want to come on down to OSSI, we have a specialist that can assist. Okay, and here's where you find out more about webinar or trainings that our data system team does. And here's where you find out more about other trainings on special education and general education topics. So we have a survey. If you're able to stay on the line for just a second, we would love to get your input. Please answer the question. I had a positive experience in this training. Do you strongly agree, agree, somewhat disagree, or disagree? Thank you for taking the time to cast your vote. This is the end of the webinar, so we're all done. We do appreciate you staying on the line for a couple extra minutes. Okay, the next question. Overall, this was an effective training. Do you agree? Thank you so much for your vote. And just two more questions. Please rate the overall course content. Please rate the overall course content and training materials. And we hope you were able to access a copy of the slides from the handout section through GoToWebinar. Thank you so much for voting. And please rate the overall presentation of materials by the trainers. Thank you so much for your votes. And the last two questions are free response. We would love to know how we can improve this session and also what you thought was great about this session. And this can be anything from like time, location, materials, all the way to topics. And we want to know, what else do you need from us? What would you like to see training on in the future for other monthly webinars or other types of trainings, both webinar or in person? We're going to close the webinar, but we're going to leave the portal open so that you can continue to type your answers in the chat box. Our non-public team will stick around for a few minutes to continue to answer your questions in your question chat box. Again, thank you for joining, and we hope you have a wonderful holiday. Here's the contact information for the team. I'll go back to this, but we just want to remind you the next webinar is January 18th, where we're talking about accommodations for our statewide assessments. And thank you very much.